Are we planning to record this? Yes, we are. In fact, I think we're already recording, so even the silliness is being recorded. Oh, I see a shaking of the head from Karen. I'm going to talk over you, though. This is the unfortunate thing. Sorry. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm sorry if you're talking, Karen, but I will shut up in just a second. I'm going to basically turn things over to Karen because Karen's going to present first. And so I'm going to stay very, very quiet. And then when Karen's done, one of you can type, "Your turn, Steve," and then I'll talk. But until then, I'm going to be quiet. In fact, I will mute myself. I will turn.
And I'll share my screen. And I'm going to stop my video to make sure that I, here, I'm going to share my screen. Can people see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm just going to check in the chat channel to make sure. Okay, I only want to see the no's, everybody. 122 yeses. If anyone can't see it, let me know. It looks like everyone can see it. Great. Okay, well, thanks so much for the introduction. Really happy to be here. I will take about 10 or so minutes and then turn it over to Steve. We do want to allow a lot of time for questions. And we're really keen on making sure that everyone's input is heard. So it will be brief, but I will point to topics that we can discuss more if there's interest. So starting off, maybe a little bio just for 30 seconds. I am a professor at the University of British Columbia. edX, and am really passionate about equity and diversity and the possibility of new platforms and tools to enable a broader range of students from all sorts of backgrounds to access education. So that's my background. And today I'll be talking about some new trends in work-integrated experiential learning in higher sketching out the problem, and I really welcome people offering different perspectives on this issue. But the way that I typically do it is the following: at work-integrated learning, which we all getting the right work experience, enough work experiences, or indeed any work experience during their degrees. But they're also not getting the other things that come with work-integrated learning, like networks or career clarity. That is a better sense of themselves, their aspirations, and their passions in order to figure out what relevant skills they do want to learn. In terms of...
Karen, could I interrupt for a minute? Lots of us are having trouble with audio cutting out several times. I think we are only getting maybe half or less of what you're saying.
Well, I can hear sound in the background. Well, what it is I've muted mine, and people need to mute their computers. And
everyone mute their computers and maybe turn off their video. If you turn off their webcam,
that'd be okay. Yeah, I was supposed to be on another call at the same time. That's why I wasn't sure I was going to listen to this. I'm waiting for my call, but they haven't phoned me, so I don't know why. I got sound, so my audio's not working. Can you see it okay?
Everyone can please mute and turn off their webcam. That should solve the problem. Thank you. And I'll keep the chat open here just in case it's not working, and I'll just check in a minute. Right, so, okay, you missed the bio, but that's okay. We'll just forge ahead. And you will be getting the PowerPoint after this, for sure. So very briefly, the fact that work-integrated learning doesn't reach all students, institutions, or employers means that there are some real gaps. I think this group pretty much knows the gaps there are for students. There are very significant gaps for post-secondary institutions. The lack of resources and networks to offer work-integrated experiences to all students, particularly across, for example, underserved disciplines like the arts and humanities, that is an issue. And on the other side of the coin, employers consistently in surveys feel that youth are unprepared or underprepared for work. Now, you can argue about whether or not this is solely the responsibility of educational institutions, but certainly Steve and I feel that there is a way to enrich students' educational experience, achieve really worthwhile pedagogical goals while addressing that perceived problem of employers. How might we do that in a world where digital disruption is affecting all sectors? Well, here's one way to visualize it. On the right-hand side of this diagram, you have the traditional and very valuable experiential learning activities. Those are both paid and unpaid. They include things like co-ops, articling, apprenticeships, service learning, clinical placements, practicums. But there's a whole new world unfolding of online platforms that are innovating in the experiential learning ecosystem, a subset of which are delivering work-integrated learning. That work-integrated learning can take the form of things like micro-apprenticeships or online project-based work-integrated learning. This can be embedded in the curriculum or be co-curricular. And that's what's really exciting, because as soon as you multiply or diversify the types of offerings and their duration, you create a situation where many more students can have access to experiential learning throughout their degree. How does that actually work? And does this really help to address some of the problems I just identified? Does it help students to gain that career clarity, to build their employer networks, to demonstrate their skills? Does working at scale really solve key problems for post-secondary institutions? Are employers really benefiting? So these are all questions we can debate. I mean, our experience at Ripen indicates that those benefits can be achieved, but it's actually a pretty significant challenge. And here I've listed some of the many challenges that we would need to address for all of this to be successful. And I won't go into them in detail. You will be getting the slides, but essentially, you know, if we're all going to do this at scale, students need the ability to embed some of these experiences into their existing academic workload, particularly non-traditional students. They need opportunities to work with a range of employer types and sizes, and we need to have a platform for students to manage, track, and showcase their work. But on the other hand, we need to make sure that the schools are able to track and showcase the outcomes and making sure these are integrated and aligned with pedagogical goals and accreditation standards. So this is actually non-trivial to move this online. It saves us some work, but it creates more work in other areas. Speaking from the perspective of Ripen, we've done about 30,000 of these experiences to date on about 130 campuses across North America. I'll just share some of the benefits that we see in our surveys. Employers, some of which have experience with co-op, when they experiment with online or these cloud-based platforms for work-integrated experiential learning, they first and foremost are usually interested in the corporate social responsibility aspect. They understand they're enhancing graduate employability. They're also interested in the insights they gain from youth. Sometimes they're actually thinking about this as a new way of hiring, because they realize that it's really, really important for them to be able to assess what students are actually able to do, rather than, or in addition to, looking at their CVs or reference letters. They also realize that the new generation is hungry for authentic connection, that the traditional conventional human resources recruitment methods are necessary, but maybe not sufficient, and that forming relationships through mentoring is perhaps really important and useful, and particularly in enabling employers to figure out what a good fit is with a potential hire. And we all know that millennials have a very high rate of turnover. Something like 40 to 50% of millennials turnover every 2 years. And so they're in searching to enhance retention rates. Employers are really also interested in this authentic connection, and that's something that experiential learning can provide. And in fact, I'll just add that 85% of the employers that work with Ripen have never ever had a co-op or intern before. They've not done it because they can't absorb a co-op or intern, but they find it more manageable to engage in an online experience. Why do students benefit? Well, number one is accessibility and flexibility. If it's embedded in a course and can be done anywhere, anytime from a device, well, it opens like a vast universe for them. It also is relatively inexpensive compared to co-op or internships. So institutions can offer many more of these to a greater number of students across a broader number of disciplines than we've traditionally been able to reach. Once those students have those experiences, they're not only getting the experience itself, but I really think, and I'd love to have a discussion on this, it's that boost to employability, but also they're enhancing career clarity through that deeper knowledge of themselves and their passions and their abilities. So in a way, it actually helps them navigate their future career choices as they're going through school. And we think this personal growth aspect, enabled by reflection, of course, on what they've gained from the experience, is one of the most positive outcomes. As an educator, so I teach 260 students a year and have done so for nearly 2 decades. I see why this is exciting for educators because it's really engaging for students, curriculum relevant, but also the inclusivity piece is really, really important because we can now tailor these experiences to the needs of our students. And I'll just give 2 very quick examples. So Deloitte Digital worked with Ripen last year. They are a new practice within Deloitte. They were not having an easy time attracting talent because they're new and tech talent wants to work for Google or Apple, and the HR team at Deloitte wasn't really that good at sourcing tech talent.
Digital, isn't it? Yeah.
Deloitte Digital.
This is not new.
Yeah. So Deloitte Digital launched 3 challenges on Ripen. These are co-curricular. It was restricted to British Columbia in this case. We had about 60 teams participating, a really surprisingly high quality of submissions. The top teams got to come and meet the Deloitte Digital partners at their Vancouver office. But the thing I'll just point out for this group is what was very interesting is seeing the quality of work that was produced by students from different programs. Deloitte doesn't send campus recruitment out to a lot of the smaller teams, smaller institutions, across the province. They eventually ended up hiring 2 people from this, 2 students, both of which were at very small rural institutions, one of which didn't have the right degree. She would never have gotten past their HR screen, but was fantastic. And so they were able to really diversify their talent funnel by running an online challenge like this. The other example I'll mention is Community Futures BC. So this was another project on Ripen. This is a very typical project we get where this is not an obvious future employer for students, but it's very aligned with the kind of service learning or social impact side of the experiential learning ecosystem. So in this case, Community Futures BC needed a refresh. They worked with students via Ripen to overhaul their website, identify new clients, and sort of reimagine themselves for a younger audience. And so this is an example of the more service learning opportunities that are enabled because organizations like Community Futures can't afford or have the staff time for a co-op, but they can easily engage in a project like this. The final example I'll mention is highly skilled immigrants. So I don't know if the people are interested in talking about this. We do projects with immigrants who, as I presume this audience knows, often arrive in Canada with qualifications that are not recognized locally and lack, crucially, a local job employer reference, which hinders their job search. We've partnered with Access Employment, and here what's really cool is the students arrive in Canada. They're usually mature students. They do their courses at places like Humber or Seneca. And if you embed a Ripen project into their courses, they actually have a reference from a local employer by the time they graduate, as well as their certificate. And this really boosts their search in the labor market for that job in their sector. So essentially fast tracking them to jobs. So if people also want to discuss the Career Ready Fund, I'd be happy to do that. So I think people on the call are from across Canada, but the Ontario experience is really interesting. They actually did invest a significant amount in the government's Career Kickstart strategy, and they have a mandate that every Ontario student has to have at least one meaningful experiential learning opportunity before graduating. Now, they're innovating in all the sorts of forms and modalities of experiential learning in order to get to that goal, because not every student is going to have a co-op or internship. And I think other provinces are thinking of heading the same way. So there's going to be more of this activity in the future, and I'd really love to hear people's feedback on where they see the ecosystem going. A final thought, and then I'll stop. I really want to emphasize the opportunity here for moving experiential learning at least partially online to enhance accessibility. Removing geographical barriers, targeting underserved groups. We just translated into French, for example, and enabling underserved disciplines to have more access. This is a non-trivial challenge. I'm not saying it's not without difficulties, but the online aspect can certainly help us address some of the longstanding barriers in this area. So with that, I will turn it over to Steve. And as I do so, I'll just answer that one question that came in regarding the community features and Deloitte examples. If the course is embedded in the curriculum, typically the student, it would be determined by the instructor, but students typically work on projects for anywhere from, let's say, 4 to 8 or 10 weeks, usually within the duration of a term. So we rarely see projects of more than 12 or 13 weeks. But this is completely up to the instructor. We have some schools where they do modular teaching in blocks, and their courses are very intense, but only last maybe 2 weeks. And then the project can be shorter. So, so that's completely up to the employer to, and the instructor, I should say, to determine. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to Steve. And I apologize for running a bit over time because of the audio glitch. So over to Steve.
Yeah, no problem. So turn down my audio now. I found a workaround. All right. Thank you all. So following Karen's sort of lead, I'm going to try to very quickly cover some ground so that we have lots of time for question and discussion and such. I did want to say at the outset, some of you didn't hear Karen's introduction. Let me just assure you, she is an extremely impressive academic with a lot of credentials and you know, just really impressive. It's an honor to be sharing this webinar with her. I'm Steve Joordens. I'm from University of Toronto. I teach a ridiculously large intro psych class, and that's 1,700 students and me. And I use a lot of educational technologies. I use them to kind of combine lectures with other things that will allow me to give students a really deep, meaningful, and relevant experience. How I can do that in my class, and a lot of what you're going to hear about today comes from that sort of source, I guess. The focus will be a little bit different, but let me kind of overlap a little bit with Karen and then take it from there. So when we think about work-integrated learning, you know, the common thing we think about, and in fact, if you search online, the definition you will find is this one, where there's an emphasis on the notion of students leaving our academy to go work in some authentic setting. And that is the sort of traditional way. But as Karen is pointing out, with technology in this instead now, technologies like Ripen, we can start to see this as a continuum of experience. Really? My audio? Really? Dang. Okay. Hoping that won't be a continued problem. I'm actually going to leave my meeting because I hear an echo there. Okay, so with technologies like Ripen, we really now have a continuum. We can have students working on projects that still have that authenticity in the sense that they are working with, you know, real people on real problems. And, you know, that's what really part of the whole engagement comes from students. And in fact, we can almost imagine that it's a nice interim step, you know, before they actually leave the academy and work in a place like that. It's kind of nice for them to have some of those experiences within the academy. So that's very cool. I want to kind of take off that a little bit and kind of tear apart to some extent why experiential learning is so powerful. And you've heard a lot of emphasis on the authentic learning, and authentic learning obviously has a you know, strong research base that shows that if students are doing something that matters, if the work they're doing has relevance beyond their own, you know, grade in a course, then they tend to find that work more engaging, and it tends to lead to a much deeper form of learning. And that's one of the things authenticity. But the other thing that's really cool and important about experiential learning is that it's typically not about gaining knowledge as much as it's about using skills, using the knowledge you have, but things like critical thinking, creative thinking, your communication skills, all of that. And so, you know, we know that in this really dynamic job market, those are the skills students need. When we don't even know what the jobs of the future are, and when we also know that students move very frequently from one job to another, it's these skills that will really give them success across a range of contexts, hence transferable skills. And so a lot of these experiential learning opportunities combine these two, right? Exercise with transferable skills in an authentic environment. And I think that's why so many of us find this like a really powerful educational experience. This is the point I want to take off on a little bit, though, that the success of this for the third party, for the institution, kind of depends on how developed these students' skills are. If we're going to send them out there to help solve problems in the real world, well, that's great if they have at least some decent problem-solving skills when we send them out. But do we really want to send them out to third parties to begin developing those skills? Like, is that where we want them to get their foundation? And I'll argue it's not. You know, we would prefer to have our students prepared a little. So that's kind of my thought for the day. Wouldn't things work best if students develop their transferable skills they developed them somewhat at least before bringing them to that authentic context. And now, you know, that they feel stronger and confident and have the foundation of those skills, now you bring them into the authentic context, which, you know, gives them the relevance. But hopefully now really cool things happen, like the quotes Karen showed you. You know, I suspect those were quotes when they went in. So, okay, that sounds great. But in fact, this is, in my opinion, a core challenge in the academy. How do we develop these transferable skills? And it's a problem because they're skills. So traditionally, we've been very good at transferring knowledge. And knowledge uses a very different underlying memory system. You can gain knowledge from one exposure if that exposure is significantly engaging. So a really great lecture, a really great textbook, a really great digital resource, you can see some information and you got it. And if it's done well, you may never forget it the rest of your life. Skills are different. You cannot get skills quickly. So with my karate example here, I like to say you can learn a lot about karate in an hour. But if you want to learn to do karate, you're not going to learn to do that in an hour, a day, a week, a month. It's going to take a lot of. And the hallmark is you need repeated structured practice. You need to use that skill. You need to practice that skill in a structured way, in a repeated way, and preferably getting feedback along the way. So this is the challenge. How do we do that? How do we do that in our classrooms? Provide this repeated structured practice within all of the constraints of time and space that we have, okay? I will argue that the single best approach to that is through peer assessment. Okay, and let me just give you a sense of a peer assessment process, and I'll emphasize the link to skill development as I do so. Here's the prototypical. There are a number of peer assessment systems out there. One called PeerScholar, and you'll see that mentioned a little bit, but there's in fact a range of them out there. Some are more formalized than others. And I'm a big believer in the highly formalized, highly structured ones because I believe they are the ones that provide the core experience students need. And so within these sorts of systems, there's now a very common process that students go through. They begin by creating something, right? And this could be in line with an assignment a faculty member already uses. But essentially, the faculty member says, I want you to produce some form of composition. In a digital platform, it's nice because it can be any form of composition. So it could be a video they're producing, etc., or a written piece. But fine, they submit it. The cool stuff happens in the next step. So once they've submitted, they log in, and now they see the anonymously presented and randomly selected work of some of their peers. Let's say 6. They see 6 peers' work structured form, they are guided through an analysis of that work. And the sort of hallmark of that, or the, I guess, critical step is, one of the things they are asked to do is to give each peer constructive feedback. So let me just have you think about the following. Imagine you're a student, you're seeing the work of one of your peers, and you're given a prompt that goes something like this. Think of all the way this work could be improved, and then zoom in on the one thing that if this person changed, you think that would maximally affect the quality of their work. Tell them what that thing is, and then give them some sense about how to go ahead and make it stronger, how to fix it. Okay, so what are we asking students to do in this situation? First, engage critical thought. Find that main weakness in the part. And so they have to think of all the problems, and then relative to each other, which one's the main problem, and then they zero in on the main problem. Okay, critical thinking. Now, creative thinking, to figure out, okay, now how could they do it differently? What should they do differently? And so they have to engage critical thought. And then they have to engage expressive communication to explain this all well to the peer, okay? Now, they move to the next peer, and they practice critical thinking, creative thinking, expressive communication. They move to the next peer. They do it again, 6 times, repeated, structured practice. By the way, all driven by the students so far. Now, as they do this to, say, 6 peers, giving each one of them constructive feedback, 6 peers are also doing it to their work. So in a third step, the third step is all about learning from feedback, learning about yourself and about your own work, that sort of metacognitive awareness. So now students are going to see these 6 pieces of feedback that were given to their work. And once again, for each one, we guide them through an analysis. The final thing is, what are you going to do in response to this work? So once again, this is peer feedback. Some of it's great, some of it's not so great. So they have to critically think about each piece of feedback and first of all decide, do I agree with it? And then if they do, or as part of the process really of deciding if they do, they have to also think creatively. What if I change my work this way? Do I think it would be better or not? So they're doing creative thinking in a metacognitive context, right? And this is all in the context of what I call receptive communication, learning to shut up and listen to feedback coming to you. So they're engaging critical thought, creative thought, receptive communication for the first bit of feedback, and then for the second, for the third, for the fourth, for the sixth. Repeated, structured practice, engaging these skills once again. Finally, they're often given the opportunity to formatively revise their work after analyzing all that feedback. They're told, okay, now take the good stuff and go ahead and make. So you should go ahead and make that as good as it can be. And you can also add a reflection piece that asks them to justify the changes they made and the changes they didn't make, which can bring in all these metacognitive skills. So I hope, you know, as I spoke through this, you get the sense that this is a context in which they are gaining intense and structured practice with all of these skills, much like an athlete going into a training camp where they're getting intense structured practice, working with skills in combination and isolation, okay? So these peer assessment systems do that, and the really cool thing about the way they do that, there's a few cool things. I love this world, but one of them is, from the professor perspective, you still assign something and you eventually grade something. All of this practice is driven by students. And when we do when we do questionnaires and a lot of actual experimental studies showing that critical thinking and metacognitive processes are getting stronger, but also when you ask the students, they like this, they appreciate it, they see great value in seeing the work of their peers, they feel like they learn a lot about where their work fits, and they would like to see this process used in more classes. So they're embracing this intense form of active learning, assessment as learning in the real formal sense. And so in my opinion, this is an extremely powerful process that really relates to the experiential context, because this prepares students to be successful when they have an experiential situation. I was actually going to show you this within PeerScholar, but given we had a little bit of audio think I'll do that. That always ends up eating a bit of time, even though I try to be efficient. So, you know, should anybody would like to see anything specifically, there you go, info@PeerScholar or Steve@PeerScholar. Let's chat. I want to end here with just one final thought for you. So when Ripen approached University of Toronto and said, hey, we've got this way of connecting students with employers and having class projects that have this authentic flair to them, the person at Toronto who deals with such things reached out to me as the EdTech, I don't know, lab rat, I guess, the guy that'll try any EdTech, and said, hey, what do you think of this? And I said, I think it's great, but how do I use it with 1,700 students? It won't work with 1,700 students, right? And then I thought about it a little bit more, and after some discussion and through support from that Career Ready grant that Karen was talking about, we revised this process. We follows now, and imagine 1,700 students. We begin with one corporate partner who issues a challenge, something they want students to work on. And I'm going to give you my colleague's challenge because his was better than mine. So he teaches the second half of Intro Psych, and what he worked with CAMH, the Center for Addictions and Mental Health, and they have posters that they put in bus stops that are meant to kind of educate the public about mental health issues. And so what they said is create the next poster. And so they kind of unleashed the students' creativity, create a poster. And so what students did is that they all created a poster, first of all 1,700 in line with this entity's desires. And then they went through a round of peer assessment. So we integrated a light form of PeerScholar into Ripen. And students now see the work of 4 of their peers. They get 100 points to distribute among those 4 based on what they think are the best. Now they could start with the 1,700, and then you could get to say the best 500, and you could have them do another round. Hey, you got some comments, because they give comments as well. They give feedback as well. So you got some comments about your work. You can try to improve it if you want, and then submit it again for the second round. At any rate, just like the Raptors going through the playoffs, we start with a big group of students, and then we end up at 10. 10 that have been polished through these iterations, and 10 that their peers think are the best submissions. Those 10 are what the corporation sees, and they interact with the corporation. And the top 3 often get some sort of real experiential opportunity. For example, in this case, they were brought into CAMH, they were shown around a little bit, they were allowed to see multiple facets of the research and the work being done in CAMH. And so they, you know, a small number got that final experience, but the whole class got the signal that at U of T we value career learning and value authentic learning. And from the moment they entered my huge intro psych class, they're already kind of introduced to this world. So the bigger point from all of this is that experiential learning is not just co-ops anymore. Co-ops are still probably, you know, the gem of the process, but we can really imagine a continuum where things like technologies like Ripen and PeerScholar can kind of work hand in hand to both develop those skills in the safe classroom context, have students begin to interact with third parties, again in a safe classroom context, and then when they're finally, you know, actually embedded, they are very much prepared, which will bring greater success for everybody. Okay, so that's my part of stuff. So I think we're just going to open it up from here for questions. I'm going to have to reconnect on my phone again because that's the only way I can hear all you guys, but it works fine. So I'm going to basically turn now while I hear things. But we can also have, it might make most sense to have questions typed in to the group chat, or people step up. Do your thing. I'm relinquishing control. It's all yours. It's our room now. What is the cost to the university? So this is, so there's 2 different technologies we're talking about. Ripen is obviously the BC company, and PeerScholar, we're Toronto based. Can I stop screen sharing? Absolutely, I can. There we go. Straight up, PeerScholar likes to work with institutions and CTL groups. And so from my perspective, the answer is if it's a new institution becoming interested in PeerScholar, first year is $5,000 for unlimited use. of the platform, and we work with you to train your internal support people, and is possible. Thereafter, it becomes a usage-based thing until usage is high enough to warrant some sort of institutional idea. But the idea is to really keep the costs low, and that you only pay for usage. You only pay if people use it, and you only go institutional if there's a point to that. But those sorts of details perhaps are probably better to have in separate conversations. I don't know. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I think I can hear you guys again. Yeah.
What does PeerScholar do?
What does PeerScholar do? The Canvas peer review tool does not. The example I like to give here is the one of, imagine a bunch of kids playing baseball on the side lot, and they do. Absolutely. Is there something good in what they're doing in terms of baseball development? Yeah, absolutely. Compare them to a kid that goes to a formal training camp where the practice has been structured, and in our case, structured by research, where the process has been finely tuned, and where they're expected to contribute at every step of the way in a very supervised manner. That's what PeerScholar does differently than the one. Wow, we're really getting into PeerScholar kind of stuff here. Echo on my audio. That's because I got my phone under the table while I'm talking, so I can hear you guys talk, but I'll shut it up. What is the a la carte price for small schools? So can we actually do this, guys? Because some of these are much more personal questions. So we have info at PeerScholar. We have Steve at PeerScholar. If you want to hit about stuff like that, maybe we'll do that. Does it have LTI integration? Yes, absolutely. We're LTI 2.0, so we can integrate with anything very quickly. And there's a Ripen one for you.
Yeah, I'll address that. It's definitely, so the students are doing assignments designed by the instructor. It's definitely not free consulting or free work. It's student academic product embedded in the course for credit. And we're very clear with companies, this is not free consulting. So the students, they are working on projects already usually in their courses, but they're projects from textbooks or projects that are designed by the instructor. But what happens is that the instructor designs an assignment, it goes on the Ripen platform, and there's like an Airbnb style matching service where companies can apply to say, hey, we see you're doing this cool assignment. Would you like to use our company as a case study? And if the instructor says yes, and the instructor can say yes or no, of course, then if the company is approved, then their case is provided to the students. So for those of you who are familiar with case-based learning in business schools or law schools, it's like substituting a live case, a real world case, for an off-the-shelf case. Often those case studies are actually a little out of date. And so what we find is people who do case-based learning really appreciate the real world, real-time aspect of this. But again, just to really emphasize, it's first and foremost something that is controlled by the instructors and is for pedagogical purposes. And we are clear it's student academic product. That sometimes the companies get things that are interesting to them, but sometimes, you know, they don't. But they understand they're engaging with students to help with their overall educational growth. I don't know if that answered Morgan's question. Oh, and the relationship between Ripen and PeerScholar, we're two separate entities, but we happen to collaborate, and so we decided to organize this session together. Also, I should be clear that this is not a UBC initiative. Ripen is independent from UBC. But with respect to who does the outreach to community and corporate partners, that is actually, in Ripen's case, it is Ripen. And so Ripen is a team that goes out and talks to new employers, talks to community partners, and then brings them into the ecosystem and helps them find a good match with instructors. So let's say you're an instructor like Steve and you want to have 5 organizations that are partnering with you in your course and your students. Ripen will has a big database of those employers, and then Steve can pick and choose who he might want to work with or not. Someone's asked about centralized office and data. Yes, we have a big data sort of focus. There's a dashboard. You can have reporting at an individual student, course, faculty, or entire institution perspective, and all of the reporting is automated and in real time. There are project management tools that help with milestones, for example. So at any one time, you could see how many students are participating, where they are in their progress on their projects, who they're interacting with. It's very granular, but then there's also the aggregate reporting. and Ripen is open to institutions beyond Canada. If you want to follow up and chat, we do lots of pilots, and I've just put my, I just emailed it only to Steve. Hold on, I can just put my email in the chat. Here we go. People can feel free to follow up and ask. Essentially, instructors can come on and try this individually. If you're interested, you don't need to have your whole university or program sign up. So feel free to get in touch. Maybe there are some questions you wanted to answer, Steve, as well.
Sorry, I've got to.
Own their own data.
There we go. Sorry, I've got a dance I'm doing here. I have to mute one phone and unmute another one. But yeah, just to quickly kick in there. PeerScholar also, and sorry, there is a confusion of the two different platforms. We just see what we're doing is so convergent. Both of us trying to build skill sets and help students succeed in that way. So we've become very literally have this sort of integrated product, but we are two independent products, and much like Ripen, PeerScholar does have an administrative dash that allows you to get at usage. There's an exciting thing I want to mention too, and I'll just kind of put it in your heads. One of the things you can ask students to do while they're assessing their peers is to actually apply a rubric to the work of their peers. And lately we've been having them apply the AAC&U value rubrics, which are rubrics related to all these transferable skills that have been validated. When you do that, if 5 students score my work for, say, how much critical thinking there is, using one of these validated rubrics, while each individual scorer isn't to be trusted, the average of 5 or more turns out to be a very good predictor of what a value-trained expert would give it. So what this means is you can as students are doing these activities, and what we're going to be doing is flowing all of those scores also up to the administrative interface, and of course bringing in the machine learning and everything everyone's got to do these days to allow you to identify patterns and stuff. So I think that's one of the directions this is going that's really kind of cool and interesting. Any other questions for either Karen or I?
So someone is saying that they're seeing the PeerScholar piece as something to add on top of the experiential learning that Ripen can facilitate working with partners. I think you can use PeerScholar on its own. I mean, for example, I teach a class of 200 students. I could imagine using PeerScholar on its own. That is, when students do an assignment, rather than just submitting it to me for marking, they could use PeerScholar to enable that mutual learning that Steve has talked about, and that is useful in and of itself. So you could also layer that on top of a Ripen project, and one use case is, okay, you've got a class of 200 students, how can they all get experiential learning? Well, you have a real life case study that they're working on, they submit in teams, you use PeerScholar so they do mutual peer evaluations, the best ranked student projects float to the top. Those are the ones that the employers see, for example, only see the top 5 or something. So that's just one way in which the combination has been used or could be used. So you don't need to use them together. And I think PeerScholar has value on its own.
Yeah, if I can jump on that too. So, absolutely, these are first and foremost 2 independent platforms where we were really looking at the development of these skills and Ripen connection with between students and external agencies. It is what adds to the confusion, unfortunately, we did work together and build a powered by PeerScholar module within Ripen. So it is also the case that if you want to use it in large classes in the context that I described, the way you would use it then is you would use the Ripen platform. And you would set everything up in Ripen as per usual. But once students submitted in Ripen, they would then be prompted to engage in a round of peer assessment. And so it's not PeerScholar in its full-fledged form. PeerScholar has a lot of ability for you to tweak and take control over how everything happens. This is a very basic where they see the work of, I think, about 3 other peers, and they have 100 points to distribute, and they can give each a comment. And so it's a, I'll say dumbed down, but that's not really fair. It still engages the critical thinking and all that stuff, and it allows those processes to be combined in a seamless way. Have the Ripen platform available to you, and if a school is using the Ripen platform, I'd have to work out the details with Dan, but I think we allow schools to have 3 or 4 large classes at no cost, where they can use the PeerScholar embedded part of that at no additional cost. If they're going to use it widely, then I think there's well, if you have PeerScholar too, then there's never any cost. But so it gets a little complex depending on exactly what you're looking at for your school.
Yeah, I can say something about how to structure a pilot. Ripen does work on a campus-wide basis with some institutions. So, for example, we have an arrangement with Seneca where any instructor across the institution can use Ripen. We also have an arrangement with eCampus Ontario where any francophone school in Ontario can use us, and that's we translated into French and supported the creation of a francophone experiential learning consortium in Ontario. So we do operate campus-wide or even consortium-wide. However, if instructors want to use us on a one-on-one basis and their school doesn't yet partner with Ripen, we are totally open to doing a pilot. Typically what we do is the instructor would reach out. So for September, you'd be reaching out about now. We would discuss your upcoming courses and your needs. We do have automated onboarding tools, but if you're new to the platform, we're happy to schedule some time to walk you through the platform and show you the wizards, because we have these automated wizards that make it pretty easy for you to set up an assignment. And typically we recommend that you would put that assignment into our platform a month or 2 before you plan to get started with your course. And then you would hear back from the potentially interested off-campus partners in enough time to approve the ones you would like to work with before your in-class project actually starts. And typically we do that pilot at low or no cost. And for those of you who are interested in the service learning component, it's also free for not-for-profits to participate. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out at the email I gave. It's a perfect time actually to be thinking about doing this for fall. I see a question for you.
Okay, so excellent. Isn't peer assessment problematic when students are not appropriately trained to mark other students who may have learning disabilities, unconscious bias, or ESL learners? Is it fair? So depending on what you mean by fair, to some extent it's the ultimate fair and to some extent it's not. In PeerScholar, everything is presented anonymously. So it's literally what students see is the work of else about them. So in that respect, things like unconscious bias, the gender or minority or the ESL, they don't see the name, and they see, unless the student literally includes something to tip that off, they will not have any sense of who that person is, and so they will treat the work to some extent. Now, if the suggestion is that somebody who has, say, a learning disability, that there should be some consideration or some literally different treatment in terms of how their work is assessed, then you're right. The peers wouldn't know that, they wouldn't have the training in it, and they would treat them like anybody else. So that's where I would work with. I saw Elaine Koo here. Yep, there she is. Hey, how you doing, Elaine? So we have a great ESL group here, and we have a great a group that deals with learning disabilities and all that. And the student, if they needed any special arrangements, would go to one of those groups. Make sure ahead of time that they're treated fairly. And what that means would be guided more by accessibility and by the people who have the expertise to tell us what fairly means in that context. But otherwise, yeah, absolutely. How do you measure success of using either or both platform? What criteria to be used? I mean, in the case of PeerScholar, we measure success through empirical research for the most part. So we've got a number of papers out there, and I have one I'd be happy to share that's a draft right now about that, students applying rubrics to each other's work. And that work shows that, it's efficacious, it's having the effects that we claim it has. And these are control group studies, these are good science. And we have a lot of qualitative stuff, suggesting that the students are happy with it and see value, and the professors find it easy to use and see value, etc. And so that all kind of sounds like success, but depending on you know, what there's more work to be done, which would be great. Okay, so I've got, I don't know if you know Morgan Rooney, but you're messaging me privately. So let me just, before I read what he said out loud. Yeah, I think so. Yes, on purpose, but okay to share. Okay. Hi, Steve. I teach English and use the very similarly structured peer assessment process in my classes. As a non-UTSC prof, can I get access to PeerScholar? If you're on, so we are site licensed at a number of institutions now. So it would be, where are you at? Sorry, I can't see which institution you're at. Let me know. Carleton? We're talking to Carleton. So if it's something that you find interesting, then would be happy to chat with you about that. I'm hoping by fall that it would be available to you, but it's certainly, you can still use it in other ways. We just really like partnering with schools and working with them to kind of ensure the ultimate success. What I would love is to chat with you, make sure you're interested, and then maybe approach your CTL group with your interest intact and go from there. Steve, it would be great to see pointers to these papers. Okay, sure. Well, we have, I'm sure we'll be sending around an email to everybody afterwards. So we will include links to all sorts of things, resources on stuff. I can give you some videos of demos because we didn't get a demo in there, and some of those papers. Absolutely, we'll make sure. Yeah, okay, go ahead. Let me mute myself so I don't make some screaming noise.
Okay, so Kim, you're making a really excellent point about unconscious bias. We've put a lot of thought into this, and I don't think we've solved it. But one of the things that we have noticed and would love to do some more like controlled studies on is the following observation, that when we can call them assessors or validators, be they off-campus partners such as employers or other students, are presented with material that students have done that is disassociated from their identity, right? So you don't know their name, you don't know their gender, you don't know their linguistic skills or any other background identifiers. What we found is this can also be a potential powerful correction to unconscious bias. So we know, for example, that unfortunately, unconscious bias filters into differential reading of CVs and resumes and reference letters. The mere fact of changing the gender of a name from Steve Joordens to Sally Joordens would result in more potential objections or doubts and about Steve or Sally's capacities. We probably all know that research well. And so what we have actually found in our tracking of students that move through school while doing Ripen projects is that employers are giving people a chance that they wouldn't normally give a chance to because they see the actual caliber of their work. So I feel like this is a really important space to explore because, as you're rightfully pointing out, these tools could be used to reduce unconscious bias, or they could fall prey to unconscious bias. And so one of the things that we're actively doing is strategizing about how to make sure the positive side of these technologies is really carefully designed. So and I would actually love, if you're interested in this, I would love to follow up with you because we're actively working on this, and we have actually put in a proposal to the Digital Supercluster to fund a pilot involving BC colleges, involving a number of forward-thinking employers who really care about equity and diversity to try and experiment with ways to make sure that we're reducing unconscious bias in these sorts of settings. So if you want to follow, if anyone wants to follow up, I would love to hear from you.
I want to add one kind of quick thing for people to think about too on this point, because it's a really cool point. We had PeerScholar used in one of the local schools, and I can't remember the cultural group, and I'm afraid, but within this cultural group that was very dominant in the school, the women were expected to not have opinions on things like politics or world issues or whatever. Their opinions were supposed to be pretty much restricted to domestic type issues. And so in classroom discussions and stuff, they tended to be very, very quiet. But in PeerScholar, they knew that all their work was submitted and presented anonymously to others, and that everything that was going on was going to be anonymous, and they loved that. The teachers said they came alive. They saw all these students with all these great ideas and stuff that they didn't, intelligent all of these students were because of this response bias holding them back, right? And the anonymity really allowed that to be lifted and really allowed them to interact in ways that were really comfortable for them. And I think it showed very clearly that their opinions and their ideas were as strong, if not stronger, than those of their male classmates. So I think that's really cool that a simple thing like anonymity can take care of a lot of these biases in a certain way, in a certain context. Obviously, a lot of work to be done, but that's a cool place to start. Okay, so I sense it's kind of winding down. As I mentioned, I will be at Stella. I would love to continue the conversation. Feel free to reach out to me. Steve at PeerScholar is probably the easiest way. And I think Karen and I were both happy to have email questions if you want to follow us up with it. As a sincere thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Beautiful Friday afternoon. Lots of things you could probably be doing right now, and you spent it with us. So we appreciate that very, very much. Thank you. Karen, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I appreciate the great questions. Thank you so much. And I've got a couple people who are wanting to follow up on the unconscious bias piece and would love to hear from anyone who has an interest. Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for bearing with us with the unstable technology, too.